Hi and welcome to VFX Tutors. I'm Josh, and in this tutorial we're going to go through how to manually track a shot where we don't actually have anything to track. So we're going to start off by opening Maya this time, and so I've got Maya open. So the first thing that I want to do is just go to File, Import, and you can download this. I'm just going to use the rig from the Roto tutorial, so I'm just going to import that. And we're going to use this as a rough lineup for when we bring it into 3DE. So we've got our rough woman. We're not doing anything to her. We just want to now make a plane. It needs to be quite big, but I think I went a bit too crazy. We need enough for the horizon line. So, and let's just scale that up. And give some subdivisions. So let's try that again. Sorry about that. I went a bit too crazy with the scale. So let's select all that. So now I'm going to export this to our file. File, export selection. Just going to go to my file. Say I just put it in data. I'm just going to call this rough geo look for lineup VO1. Export selection. So now we've exported this. Our next step would now be to bring this into 3D and do a single frame lineup or a rough guess lineup. So I'm just going to open up 3D now. Cool, so we have 3D open. So what we can do, we can go to our sequence camera and just load in our image sequence. Just go browse. 32, go play. Love girl on beach. Select OK. And as usual, it'll be dark. It's in a linear color space. So let's change that to 2.2. And as we have no idea what any details for this, we'll just play back and export our buffer compression files straight away. And if this takes a long time, I might fast forward through it, because then we can sort of figure out our a reasonable focal length and also possibly get some of this track as well. So the thing is with shots like this, we're looking for any parallax. I know the ocean is constantly moving, but just from there I can tell you there's absolutely no parallax in here. And just from seeing how this is shot, this is just clearly on a tripod and just panning around, so that's going to work in our favour. Let's play through and see if it's lumpy. So I'm going to treat this as a nodal shot, and obviously here we've just got nothing. We can go to the windows, go to image controls, turn it on, and very unlikely there's going to be anything in there. So yeah, there's nothing coming out of that. So we're going to we can get a couple points on here probably if we wanted to. But let's do the manual tracking in Maya, because you can probably just track that some of those points. But cool. So what we're going to do, I'm just going to pick a frame that's going to help us the most. with our position, because we want to get a good start position. And I'm actually thinking maybe, because all we see is shoulders, we don't see anything there. We see a horizon. Let's go with this. Let's go for something like that, because we've got a good horizon position here and we can sort of see our body. So now I'm going to just load in our 3D model we exported. Just go into models and import OBJ file. Roughly a rough geo lineup. And let's turn it to reference only. So we've not changed any of the lens. I have no idea what film back height and width this is. I can probably take a good guess at this is quite a long lens, because there's a lot of image compression in here. So this looks closer than it really is. So and you can tell by the way of the face looks a little bit compressed from it. So we're going to start with a 60 mil. I'm just going to go to F5 and center our models. Where's the rest of that? Let's go to F6. Okay, so let's go back to Maya and export the rest of it. I don't know why that didn't export. So let's go File, Export Selection. Let's overwrite that. Yes. Oh, probably and that as well. And let's go back to 3D. Right click and reload models. Cool. So now we've got it all in there. So if we go to F5, we can, let's try to get that position again. Let's go to our project and change our far clipping plane. We may have made the geometry a little bit too big. Let's bring that in. So we need it big, but maybe not as big as. Okay, right. So we made that way too big. So let's just start that again. It needs to be quite big, but I think I went a bit too crazy. We need enough for the horizon line, so, and let's just scale that up. And give some subdivisions. So let's try that again. Sorry about that. I got went a bit too crazy with the scale. So let's select all that. Export selection. Let's just overwrite that. Let's go back to 3D. Reload 3D models. Cool. So now we can see our background. We definitely made it a little bit too big. And the reason this is quite useful because you can sort of see your perspective. And We can just try to see what it looks like in multiple angles. We're just doing rough lineups, so we're just seeing what it looks like. So let's go to a face. And all I'm doing is just... Oh my god, I've just changed that by accident. It's just comparing her face against the rig. And that's not going to match, but we should get some sort of... So if you see how... So if we... So if you know how the focal lengths change the look of a face, it will help you to understand what I'm trying to do. So if I change the focal, you can see how the wider we go, the sort of the perspective of it goes a bit funny. But this is kind of, everything looks very compressed. So maybe even 100 mil seems reasonable. So I'm gonna go with 100 mil for that, just because it looks the shot looks extremely compressed. Obviously these proportions are not going to be correct. We're just, because she's on the ground, it gives us a good idea of where stuff is. Cool, so we're just going to store that pose. And we're going to remember that we're on frame 112. Just going to go to F2. I'm going to make loads of points, any random points. And I'm just going to lock this in. I'm just going to edit, project points on 3D models. Press Alt-C. And now that's there, forever locked in. So this is what we're going to start with in Maya. So we've got our rough position, we've got a horizon line on our background. We can make some more subdivisions for this geometry. But this is where we're going to be starting in Maya. So we're pretty much done in 3D. We're not going to do any distortion because we've got nothing to guess it on. So with things like this, you're probably better off. There's nothing really saying what's going on here. So I'm actually just going to leave it for this shot. And I'm just going to export out my camera. So I'm just going to project Maya person 1. And cool. So I'm just going to export my camera and that'll export out a single frame. I'm not going to change anything else. So next thing is to bring this back to Maya. So I've got Maya open now. So the first thing I want to do is import my camera and my geometry. So I'm going to go to File, Import. Like I said, you can do this with any software. I'm just using Maya because this is just what I use, but you can do this in pretty much any 3D software. So I'm going to import my scene. Then I'm going to import my rough geo lineup. So now you can see we've got our girl. And if we go panels perspective, our image plane has, so set up our image plane, go depth, to 1, and change this to 0.7. It's not loading in, so we might have to load it in again. And we'll use image sequence. We just turn our shading wireframe on shaded on. We can scrub to what we did our lineup on. So we can't really see anything else because we change our clipping plane. So if I select my camera and just add a couple zeros to that clipping plane, maybe change this to change that to 1. So now we can see our sky dome, which is at absolute infinite distance. I think our lineup was there. It's nice flat with the horizon. So this is our furthest point away. We can't really see much geometry, so what I'm going to actually do, if I go panels, tear off a copy, because we're going to have to use a similar method to what we do with body tracker by making our sort of key positions. Just go to panels, perspective. I'm going to change my clipping plane on that one as well. So I'm just going to hide that for a second. I'm going to make a ground plane again. Just can't really see much on this one. I'm just going to scale it. Now I can start to see it in this one. So I think the other one might have been a bit too big. So I'm just going to keep scaling it. Obviously you can just translate it if you like. I'm just going to keep scaling it until it meets the horizon. It probably doesn't need to be as big as we already made it. So I'm just going to stick this down here for now. I'm going to go to my polyplane. I'm going to add some extra divisions. More in the height. Do 25. Let's do 125 by 50. Obviously we've got, in fact, actually, no, let's keep it as keeping that low because then that'll just turn into a mush after a while. And I'm just doing it so I can see it in this viewport. And you can probably just shift this and make it a little bit better. In fact, let's hide that. Where is our camera? So we probably can. Oh no. Let's hide that. So I'm just gonna delete all the polygons behind the camera. So I don't think we need that. And don't worry that these are kind of rectangles, we're just using it so we can see it in here. So now all I'm going to do is just going to select my faces on here and just delete that old one. And if we select polygon here, we can probably select that edge loop and delete that. And delete that. So we're just kind of optimizing it so we don't have loads of polygons in here. And you can see we can push that all the way up to there, to our sort of furthest distance. But as you can see, there's almost no point because we're just going to be stacking it. So I'm just going to call this set geo. Cool. So obviously we have nothing to track. Let's put this all on a layer so we can add a color to it. So that's much clearer. Then I'm going to go to my Arnold, my render viewport 2.0, change my anti-aliasing to smooth, multi-sampled, and you can change this, lower this down if you want. 8 is usually pretty good. Cool. So our problem is that we haven't been able to track anything, but we've got all these. We need to be able to track it basically. So what I'm going to do first is I'm going to create a locator because I don't you can animate directly on the camera. I don't particularly like doing that. I like to always animate on a locator or a shape. So I'm just going to create a locator. So now if I go to my girl on beach camera, I can select all my translation rotations, anything keyed in red. I'm going to break those connections so there's no keyframes. I'm going to press Shift P. And I'm going to select my locator. Let's just double check. It might not have broken it, let's just check. Cool. Let's go back to 112. And let's select our locator. Then our girl on beach, and we'll go constrain, point, constrain, orient, so we know it's in the exact position. We can delete that. And we can just middle mouse click that under the locator. So now we've removed all that animation off there and placed it under our locator. We can press S to save that keyframe on the locator. So with this, I'm going to kind of treat this as a nodal because there's not really much parallax in it and it's hard to tell really what's going on. But what we can do, we can match the horizon and the Y rotations, and we should be able to get a really nice track out of it, just manually. It's obviously quite a lot of keyframes, so we're going to try and hit as much of this in our in-betweens. So we've got that line up there. And I'm just going to look through and see what we've got. So this way it can be quite tricky, so we're going to do this completely manually in Maya, but sometimes you have to. So I'm just looking, all I'm doing is looking through for points that I can recognise as, because obviously in the water things are moving. And you can get a pretty good guess of stuff just from the waves, because they're fairly localised, but they're probably moving a bit. But what I can do, I can go down to here, and I can see this part of this rock, and this is going to be a nice indicator. Let's see how far I can go down before getting that. Probably should have done my one single frame lineup with that in there. That would have made more sense. Let's go to keyframe 109. Just go to our camera. And I'm going to turn my auto key on so I don't have to keep keyframing. And just going to scale my manipulator up. I'm just going to rotate this. At the moment, because he's walking, I'm not too bothered about that. I'm just all I'm focusing on is getting this horizon line correct. And obviously we've got some movement. Because she's not moving that much, we can also use her for the rotation as well. It's only a small amount. So obviously it's not the same shape, she's probably moving, but I'm not going to do any translations, I'm just going to be using rotations for this. So I feel like we've got, if you look at our arm, obviously she's walking, so it's not going to be absolutely perfect, but we can sort of get the distance relatively close. I think that's probably about right. So now, because I'm going to use this as a sort of guide for my rotation speed, so I'm going to make a cone. I'm just going to go 180. I'm not that fussed about, because that's probably not the correct depth, but we're treating this as a nodal, so it should be fine. And obviously this is completely flat, so I'm just going to use this cone as a rotation reference. Cool. So we've got our first two keyframes. I'm just going to scrub through, and you can see that corner of that rock. You can keep seeing until it goes through, and you can see it about there. So this is kind of like, let's scale this camera up, it's tiny. Your last resort sort of. Last resort animation sort of stuff. Because this can be quite tricky. Let's just see how that looks. And we'll go to our Windows animation editors and graph editor. And what I want to do, if I just drag this over here, it's gone over there. I go to my rotate. These are the two keyframes that we've just made. I'm going to linearize them. Just going to drag this over here. So we need to fix this sort of dropping down, so we'll bring that up. And we'll just, what we'll do, we'll just go through and check all the horizon on these sort of keyframes. And you see it's sort of getting there. We just need to add some more keyframes on our keeping our horizon in. I'm going to do this on every 10 keyframes. And we're only focusing on the Y and X for now, so we're not going to worry too much about the rotation. So if you look at that, you can see we've got something fairly rough. Obviously, we've got some movement which is not correct here. So let's compensate that by fixing the Y. I'm just going to use that cone. And you might not even see it in some bits, so I'm just going to make another keyframe there so I can guesstimate it there. Like, this is quite hard. It's probably one of the more difficult things to get cameras working in just in Maya. So it's extremely tricky to get right. So I'm just going to go through and get it roughed out. Just gonna do this horizon line. Same with body tracking. Sometimes you might end up having to delete some keys, but try and get it as close as possible. I'm just going to do every 10 keys and just sort that horizon out. And there's going to be a point where we don't see any of the horizon line. So I think past that, what we generally do is do a sort of post infinity. So that's kind of just continuing the movement from the last sort of known animation. And you can see our height's not really changing with our head. Obviously our position is, because she's moving. That's also quite, obviously she's walking, so let's not worry too much about that yet. So we're getting our height. That's all we're going to worry about for now. It's just getting this horizon line in. I'm just going for every 10 keyframes. You can do it however many keyframes. Obviously the least amount you do, if you start keying every frame, you might start getting some sort of lumpy camera movements. But for this, it's probably, yeah, it's going to be, you're going to be hard pushed to get it absolutely perfect. But you can get something that works, and that's probably more important than getting it perfect. Having something that you can give to the rest of your team that can work with, even if it's a case of them having to reproject stuff. So if I go back to my, if I just make that small, in my Y, you can sort of see there's a trend angle, if you know what I mean. So it's kind of what we can do is just keep going, and let's go to that keyframe. I'm just going to slightly rotate it and make a key. Then I'm going to select only my up and down. And I'm just going to match this angle. So it's sort of following here. Let's delete that. I don't know. We can have a look at that in a minute. So I've sort of roughly continued it. Let's have a look. Let's see if that. So our Y looks not Our rotation doesn't look too bad, but obviously all of our horizon line's broken. So let's go through and fix that. Select all that. Something's gone funny here, so I'm going to go curves and not sure what's happened there. Let's pull that up. Probably shouldn't be like that. So sometimes it's just better to delete keys. That doesn't seem right, so I'm just going to get rid of that. So we've got a fairly reasonable curve. Just going to minimize that, and now I'm going to. Oh, it might have been a. I'm going to turn auto key off. I think because I may have auto keyed everything. Where's break selection? There, I'm going to break that. I'm going to turn my auto key off. I'm just going to scale up so I can see my camera. It's just easier that way. Cool, I'm going to put my auto key back on. Then you go to E. I'm just going to fix this horizon line. Obviously this is not gonna, we're not gonna see that woman walk because she's walking basically and she's static, so that's gonna not, unless you plan on a body tracking as well. But if we look here, we can sort of see we're actually starting to get something working quite well. Even though all of this is moving, it's still going to be quite hard to tell if it's working or not. But we can sort of guesstimate the movement and keep this horizon line fairly fluid. And just basically keeping most things just logical. So I'm just going to go through all the keyframes that I've done. You can see we might have to introduce some Z-roll in here at some point. Worry about that afterwards. I'm going to try and keep the X and Y axis is our main focus for now. Seems like we're getting something actually pretty good. Don't worry about the bumps, we can fix that a bit later. And we need to fix those Y rotations. So we're going to do the exact same thing. And all I'm doing is I'm sort of trying to predict, as much as I can, predict the curve. I'm just going to make a keyframe that makes sure that's on up and down. And most of the time that's all you can really do on shots like this is actually just predict the curve. So we've got something fairly basic here. So we've got our sort of Y rotation here, and it's a little bit lumpy, but we can just go through and have a look at our keys, and things will probably be broken. So if we look at that, it looks pretty messed up, because it's probably not actually as much as we thought. So if we just undo that, actually, let's go back to that and undo all that. I think it actually might stop. So I'm going to stop that. So if you predict it too much, you could end up adding wrong animation onto it. So what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to rotate it one, because I can see my cone here and it just comes off that edge. So I'm just going to rotate it just enough so it's roughly in the correct place. And if you can't quite get it, sometimes it's easier just to select it in the curve editor, and then you can adjust it that way. We don't need to move it that much. And all I'm going to do is I'm going to make another, I'm going to select this cone, duplicate it. And I'm only going to move it on the ground. And I'm just going to use this to sort of guesstimate another position. And because we're kind of working in a nodal state, it doesn't matter if these are in the wrong depth, because it's pretty, you would never really be able to find the correct depth for this anyway. So like all this, we're just going to do best guess. So now I'm going to switch over from this cone to this cone. You see it rotates slightly. Nowhere near as much as I thought it was. And the more accurate we can get this sort of rotation here, we can then continue that up. So if we go back to our rotation, we can sort of see now with those rough keyframes, we've got this rotation curve which is sort of working with our Y. And obviously he sort of focuses more on the person here, so it's more than likely that it starts off with a slow curve, then ramps down quite quickly. So let's just go to our hit. I'm just going to make a quick keyframe. I'm going to continue this curve. And albeit this is quite rough, and we can delete these keyframes, because we don't, even if it's, we want it smooth. So being wrong and smooth is better than being as close as you can get but really lumpy, because at least with smooth you can work with it. But we should be able to get this pretty close anyway. So now if we look at that, it's working just from predicting the curves. It looks quite nice. And obviously we're going to get some sort of wobbling. And we've got the horizon ramping up and down. And you can sort of see, if we look how she's walking, she's not really walking, she's sort of rotating. So that's where the slow Y rotation comes from. So she's not really moving that fast. Then she's walking, so it speeds up. She's still walking. And she's staying relatively in the same place and frame. And I think she does stop there. So you can probably safely say that it sort of ramps up to around here, then sort of curves down. So let's go to our Y rotations. like I say, with this, when we have nothing, it's best guess on what looks correct. Let's just make a keyframe. I'm going to pull this down like that. And at this point, it's more artistic choice as well. You can kind of have the background doing whatever you want. Generally, you want to keep it logical. But let's say, because she sort of walks and stops, our best guess would be to sort of have this sort of ramp up, probably something like this, or ramp down, sorry. So it's a nice smooth transition. So if we actually look at that, ignoring the horizon line, it's probably actually a bit, and it probably stops too soon, so actually, and it doesn't stop fully, so let's play with the tangent so it doesn't stop completely. So now if we look at that, we've still got some movement. Like I say, you can probably change this quite a lot as well. It's because you don't really see much. There's a lot of artistic choice that you can put into this. But for now, let's now fix the stuff that we can see. So let's scrub through. Like I said, we've probably got some Z rotation here as well we should fix. Let's just have a look at all our... Oh, undo that. So let's try keeping it to the basic of the X and Y rotations at first, then we can focus on trying to make it a little bit tighter. So we've got some bumps here. It's quite hard because you definitely need a couple monitors for this, or two at least. Just gonna pull that and just make a keyframe. Doesn't seem to be updating both windows, so there's a tiny bump in there. We can see this in the graph editor. We can fix the bumps afterwards after we've had a play with these curves. So it's updating now, which is nice. What we can do, we can use the curves to find... It's easier to control it in the curves if you need to sort of fine tune it. Oh, wait, no, let me slip that. So I'm just going to go through all these keyframes. Let's do it. Because we're moving at really small amounts, but it looks like a lot in the curve editor. But we want to keep this as smooth as possible. And that's what's going to help you a lot. Just trying to keep this horizon line as close as possible. Let's get rid of that keyframe. We might not need that. Just go through it, slightly adjust these keys. Just going to go through and check. So we've got some very slight Z roll in here, but like I said, we're going to just focus on the X and Y for now, getting these keyframes looking really nice. So that's probably a Z roll there. And we've got some sort of, let's have a look at that key. Possibly could come up a bit. Yeah, we've got some Z roll here, so if you've got more coming on left and right, just don't worry about it for now. We want to try and get this sort of working. Also, you've got a lot of Z roll here, but we've got no keyframe, so we can sort of guesstimate that down there. We can sort of see where this on, because we're on a nodal, we can use multiple parts of the geometry to sort of keep this correct. So her head is sort of in this sort of section here. So you got this block here and this block here, and she fits within this range of 6 sort of rectangles. So we can sort of keep her height in there, which is going to help. So she's not too far off this edge, and the same with that. And if you want, you can also match the background with her as well. So we could almost, because we don't know, we're sort of guessing. Because it's about here, and probably when she turns, it's there. And but like I say, at this point, completely creative. You can do whatever you want, I think. Obviously, you don't want it spinning like mad. You want it to look natural. But there's no connection to the ground, so don't worry too much if it's not perfect. Because I would assume something like this, you're probably going to do a sky replacement or something. So let's have a look through. Looks fairly reasonable. Like I say, you can't really tell if it's correct or not until you put something, until you put a replacement background in. And because you could effectively have this stop there, but I believe we're still, because she's walking, we're still rotating, and it stops. Because you can see from where we used our reference points in the rocks, we can see how much the rotations are working, so we can guesstimate that we're still she's walking at a relatively average speed throughout. So let's go now to our last frame, which we see the horizon. So now let's go to our Z rotations, and we can scrub through and let's have a look. I'm not too bothered about the Z rotations there. And let's just keyframe it there. And we'll go through and let's see if we can slightly adjust our Z rotations, try and get it level throughout. Something's come off here. Why is that? Let's have a look. Let's just pull that up. You want to rotate Z's. So it's a tiny amount. I think I probably should have fixed it for pretty much all of it. It was just a slight offset. So let's just now go to our X. And we can really, what we can do, let's get this horizon line consistent. Actually, it's still very slightly out in our rotation. So as you're on quite a large area here, so we will have to go backwards and forwards. But the cleaner we get this, the nicer it will be. So I'm just going to go through my keyframes, and I'm going to really, because we've changed the rotation on the camera, it will be slightly off. So whatever we do in the camera, we'll have to always fix in our other rotations. But this is the tricky thing with doing shots like this in Maya, is that it's very manual, but you have to do a lot by eye, and there's a lot of creative and sort of logical sort of thinking that goes into it. Also, using your graph editor is probably your most useful tool, because that means you can, instead of using your manipulator is really good to get things in the right places quick, but to sort of fine-tune things to a level that you want, they're not great. And if you're still not quite getting it, select your point, press F, and that'll zoom in on it. That means you can really do tiny adjustments. Just going to go through every single keyframe that I've made. And when I come to a point where I need to adjust the Z rotation, probably means that I have to go back and fix the previous keys. Because we're on such a large area, it's just what's going to happen. You'll notice if you just take your time and just be really really accurate with your placement, you'll start to get some really good results. And you'll be surprised how many shots you'll probably, if you're working in VFX, you'll come across, you'll undoubtedly come across a shot like this, and it'll be like, oh great. But you can make it easier for yourself. It's unavoidable. You'll get shots like this. But as we're trying to keep it smooth, like I said, we can try and get every single thing in. The chances are we're going to make the camera worse. So at best, our camera should always be smooth, because a jittery camera will cause us way more problems. So I'm not keyframing, so I think we've pretty much fixed that Z roll. Just in a couple frames. So we're just going to go through every single keyframe. Just readjust for that Z roll. And you can sort of see it's actually started sticking quite well there. We're just treating this as a nodal, so when it's a nodal with no parallax, you can get away with a lot. That's looking good. Need to bring that down, up. And whatever we have our horizon, whether if you have it slightly blue on top or completely chopped off, it's entirely up to you, but you just want to keep it consistent throughout. So why not just have a tiny bit of blue? So I'm just going through all the X rotations. Just getting that lined up nicely. I think as we come to here, we really start to lose our horizon. So let's just look at this all the way through. The important thing is making this look natural. And I think as a first pass that looks pretty good. For our Y rotations, I think we're not really going to get much better. But what we can do, we can fix this lumpiness in the background. So I'm going to start from... I'll start doing in-betweens. I'm going to go to that keyframe. I'm just going to go through all these X rotations and do an in-between. So on every 15th frame. I'm just using the manipulator to make keys because I don't want to have to keep selecting keys in here. This is where you got to be really careful that you don't add too much, because then you could make a jittery camera. Just going to go through on every fifth though and try and match that horizon line. So it can be very difficult to see. The more attention to detail that you put into this, the better it will be. So, fortunately, it's quite a time-consuming job, but because we have nothing to track, there's not really much choice. But at least you'll be prepared if you come across stuff like this. It's better to know it and then be able to be like, yeah, I can do that. And you have the panic if you suddenly come across a shot, you're like, oh my god, nothing to track. You can see even the cones here are working really well. So it is quite... It can be quite painful, but once you've done it, you'll have a nice sense of achievement after it. Doing probably the hardest sort of... Well, they're not... They're probably not the hardest track shot you'll get, but being able to... These can be pretty difficult, to be honest. It's not to say they're not the hardest. They're definitely up there with some of the most difficult ones. But if you just take your time, just be really accurate with your adjustments, and use your curve editor, and just make sure that you don't do loads of keyframes. Just do blocking out keyframes first. Like, save a lot of animation stuff, because it's still sort of animation really, is making sure that you block stuff out first. And you can see on this rock, this sort of crack is staying nicely on that line. And blocking out correctly will save you a lot of pain. Yeah. Especially it's like a... Luckily that this is still like almost 300 frames, but luckily about 170 you can kind of make it up effectively. Like make it up within a logical sense. It's not really updating very well at the moment for some reason. It keeps stopping, but so just go for keyframe. And we're going to go over keyframes that we've already done, but that's just the nature of it. You're going to go over things because we did it in a way where we did our rotations, we did our Y, then our X. Actually, I think we did our Y and X at the same time, but then our Z rotation will kind of break some of that, but get us in a good place to sort of get a reasonably good camera animation. Hopefully by the time we've done these sort of in-betweens, I'm hoping that there's always a high chance that we could have just made a lumpy camera, but let's hope that we haven't. So like before, the blur sort of stuff that we did, trying to keep it in the center. Obviously it is difficult to see, so don't worry if you're not getting it absolutely perfect. It's just one of those things that takes a lot of practice and having a good eye for sort of being able to see where it is as well. Come up to our last one. So even though we probably didn't need to do all these in-betweens, but so let's have a look, scrub through. So look at our rotate. Check we've got nothing strange going. It looks pretty smooth. It's fairly logical. We don't want to add too much in here because that's when we start getting some funny results. We don't want any sort of like jitters in the Y. And if we let's make this bigger so we can see. Let's just have a little look through. Obviously up to here, you can sort of, if it's not to your liking, you can sort of play it however you want. But, oh, what's that keyframe? So maybe, let's have a look. So, even though we've done in-betweens, we still might need to do in-betweens the in-betweens, which looks like we may have to. So let's... I'm just going to scrub through the timeline, just look at areas that may need it. So I definitely think 10, 12 might need it. So we can just go through, just double check we've not got any floatiness. I think even maybe there might need it. And you can do this for every frame. I just don't want to do it too many, just in case it starts to get jittery. Because you can almost start to hallucinate things and start seeing things that aren't really there. So it's quite high here. So it could even be a bit more of a Z roll here. But if we change that, we have to change everything. So let's see if we can get it in the... Oh, that's fine. Obviously you can play blast this and you get probably a better idea of where it might be slipping off the horizon, but it's not a very heavy plate, so you should be able to just see it by... So we've got it. Definitely drops down there. Might need another keyframe here. Ooh. Sort of does dip down there as well, just slightly. This is like the tiniest of movements, but we can try and get it as best as possible. We actually need to bring it down as well a bit more. This doesn't look like, obviously our horizon's come off by then. And it's come in by then, so we might have... Ooh. Sometimes this is a pain to select. Just trying to keep it as tight as possible because it kind of... Cool, so we've done, there are some pops in there, but we can go through and, how long has this taken now? This is not too long. Let's spend another 5 more minutes on it and see where we go. Because I want to try and avoid to make these sort of hugely long tutorials. I'm not sure if you guys, I don't know how you prefer it. Would you prefer sort of chopped up ones, or I always like trying to just get it all in one tutorial, but I'm not sure if that's your sort of, I don't know what you guys' internet's like. You might not have the internet to watch an hour-long YouTube. I don't know, but I'm trying to keep them shorter, or without losing information. But I'm pretty. Let's see if we can let's turn auto key off and see if we can play through that. It sort of plays through. Not great. It's probably faster to scrub through. So I'm quite happy with that. It's working pretty well. We can spend ages refining it and try and get these tiny bumps out of the horizon, but I think it's pretty good. So yeah, if you want to keep on improving on that, that's perfectly fine. But I'm probably gonna hold it here for now. It's pretty close. So yeah, that's how we sort of approach shots where we can't track anything in the background, and we try and manually track it in Maya. So yeah, if you've enjoyed this tutorial, hit that like button and subscribe for more like this.